One ended up in grotesque life. You're walking your children to school past somebody's being beheaded, and the whole, this is life in the city, in a relatively modern city. And yet, if you look at what happened in societies where spiritual life, attention to God, human faith was embraced and intensified, and the corruption of the church was purified, and not only the Protestants, like Erasmus was a reformer inside the Catholic Church, never left the Catholic Church, that everywhere religion was cleansed, and it resulted eventually in the establishment of the United States. And then look what happens when you have the intensification of faith and the purification of corruption. You have John Wycliffe, translate the Bible into English. You have the authority of Scripture. That means you read yourself. You don't have some corrupt guy telling you how to understand things that serve his own benefit, or the land of his cousin, the church land that belongs to his cousin. So the Scripture over church hierarchy. Erasmus, whom I just mentioned. Again, the purification of Catholic practices. Who else? Luther, the priesthood of all believers, challenging hierarchical structures. He's a revolutionary. The thing is that he's not deciding that he himself is the author of moral law. He surrendered to God, he surrendered to Scripture, and he's participating in the elevation of human beings. The Council of Trent, even Galileo, the foundation of science, he remained faithful to the church. The English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell, the parliamentary sovereignty and religious tolerance. These are all religious people. Locke, separation of powers, the American Revolution, which eventually established this beautiful land.
I'm not that thankful.
Oh, it's the intensity of the spiritual commitment of the reformers, and to make sure that direct access to spiritual life is made possible by such things as the translation of the Bible into common language of the people, challenging church hierarchies, the Gutenberg press that made the Bible available affordably, and it wasn't written by hand, it was printed, and everyone could have one. Does that respond? Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, first, collection of what I'm calling the twin rails. David presents the option to consider religion itself the problem, and to remove it and replace it with something else, secular philosophy. We've seen it twice in a row. I guess you could keep trying. I don't feel like how many times, and it's only gotten worse each time, or the notion that the roots of human being is tied to something greater, and that always has to be invested in with courage. And so there you have, my job is to talk about the counter-proposal and the option of reform and purification and cleansing and intensification of greater spiritual life produced exactly what the revolutionaries of all sorts want: greater human equality. It comes down to the simplest imaginable point. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are, you know the thing, vote for me in 2024. All men are created, endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. Self-evident. That's what's called in philosophy axiomatic. It's an axiom. I'm not arguing. It's not something you establish by argument. It's self-evident. And what is self-evident? Not only our equality, that we're created equal. We're created. This is the start of everything. This is what is abandoned by the rationalists and the materialists. They abandon that we are created and that our rights are endowed by our Creator. These are where the beginning of simple common sense You don't even really have to be a religious person. All you have to do is be logical, honestly speaking. Is anybody here self-created? Have you ever met someone self-created? It's a piece of simple logic. Have you ever seen a thing self-created? You got a couple of coffee cups in front of you. Is anything self-created? It's an unreasonable, illogical thing. And yet that simple observation is the beginning of everything, and it's the beginning of the United States of America. And our rights, they're universal, they're born into every person. One rail, constructive thought, the other rail, misdirected thought. Here, after the founding of the United States, here are some of the things that happened following the founding of the United States. The abolitionist movement, the abolition of slavery, William Wilberforce, Christian pastor, women's rights movement, Katie Stanton, Catholic, Susan B. Anthony. These are all religious people. John Wesley spoke out against slavery. Slavery was ended by religious people. Granville Sharp, abolitionist, Christian philanthropist, rulings against the legality of slavery. Abolition of the slave trade. That's Granville Sharp. William Wilberforce, the single most important figure in the end of slavery, abolished the slave trade and later slavery itself. These are all, it has the same origin point as when the French Revolution started. The French Revolution did nothing to help a single soul ever, not one ever. And the reformers, in response to the corruption of the clergy in medieval times, they were not saying, and next we're going to abolish slavery. No, it's just what faith does. It's just what happens when one opts for common sense. Not even religion. I happen to like religion and faith, but just common sense. Please show me something self-created. There. And then from that, we have the greatest movement of the arising of human equality in human history, all just from the work of the reformers. Did anybody recognize this individual? You recognize what that is, right? A slave ship, right? That was his ship. John Newton, the writer of Amazing Grace, because God struck from his heart, God told him the evil of slavery. And the Amazing Grace, the greatest Christian hymn ever written, the grace was that God saved him from his life as a slave trader, as a guy who owned a slave ship. So this is the fruits of a simple common sense decision. And so there is hope, despite David's effort to depress us.
That's done with something.
Okay. All right, so that's part one of my response that's just to the French Enlightenment. All of these developments which I just introduced or described here, all of these come from the simple recognition. For them it wasn't common sense. For them it was adherence to faith. They were religious people, to reform the corruption of the medieval system. The question is, do you reform or do you remove and replace? That's that. The next thing David spoke about was communism, and I just want to quickly do a very similar thing. There's two rails, twin options. One option, secular philosophy, Marxism. Another option, similar, the reform concept, the reform movement. Don't remove and replace what is divinely ordained. It would make sense to me anyway. Okay, so here are your options. Reform or remove and replace. Those are your options.